Okay, welcome back to the Investigative Journal on this October 9th, 2015 day on our calendar. I'm your host, Greg Anthony. Again, you're listening to the Investigative Journal on FirstAmendmentRadio.com. You can catch my show every evening from 6 p.m. to 7 p.m. That's Pacific time on FirstAmendmentRadio.com. And I want to continue what I was doing yesterday. I was going over and making some comments on an interview I did with a New York police detective, Jim Rothstein, connecting the dots between the Vatican-led New World Order, our government, pedophilia, some of the big wigs in our country who are keeping this story quiet, and as well as showing you how his story bolsters the defense of people like Tony Alamo and his ministry who have been targeted by the Vatican for their stance in telling us the truth about this organization. Now, I learned about it when I worked in Rome, lived in Rome for almost 7 years, and saw firsthand the Vatican Bank scandal, which Jim refers to. And I think we'll go right back to that 2006 interview, and I'll make some comments, and let's move forward with former New York police detective, Jim Rothstein.
He operates.
Oh, he just operated. He was flamboyant. The kids would go right into the, if you know where St. Patrick's is, he was behind there, and they would just walk in there. You know.
Okay, who he's talking about is former Cardinal Spellman.
It was wide open, and we did observations there and everything. We didn't see what was going on inside, but from informants we had, like I said, the one guy that I got was that somebody ratted him out, and he got caught with the cardinal shoes. So these kids were going in and out of there. My informant told me that many kids were brought there. So it was a wide open operation.
Now, how did he function with the mafia? How did he function with how did he control, in a sense, the governmental operations of New York, federal people, how the judges? How does he operate?
Just because he was Cardinal Spellman, he had that kind of power. The man, and you got to remember the real estate holdings, plus the political people that owed him favors, and he knew where all the dirty laundry was on everybody else around. That's how he controlled everything. You know.
And Spellman, basically, how did, now you're investigating this. Tell us, and I wanted to get into this in the second hour, but I guess let's do this first. I want to mention this. What about the Jesuit general? What have you found out about him?
Well, the Jesuits were very interesting. They're supposedly the soldiers of the church. Now, there was a faction there that was totally bad, but we also had a faction that cooperated with us and gave us information. For many years, and I can't mention the guy's name, but I had a contact there that gave us a lot of information over the years. But we also know that there was another segment of the Jesuits that was not that decent. So that's how I operated, and that's how I got a lot of my information.
And when you say not that decent, what type of activities were they involved in?
That anything and everything you can imagine in the church. They were, again, the good guys did the good things, and the bad guys, I'm just trying to think of some specific stuff, but, you never knew what side they were on. I can't right now think of anything specifically to go into other than the fact that I had this one guy who was my informant out of the Jesuits.
And basically, did this lead up to Kolbenbach?
I actually, with him, I never got that. I never got anything directly on him, but it was definitely there. And
it's almost like trying to get to the top boss in the mafia. You can know it's there, but you can't get through the layers.
That's right, and that's what that whole thing was about. And it was amazing the information we got, but I always felt that any information that I got was to serve a purpose of getting rid of competition, or I guess to knock out somebody else. It always worked that way. You get information not only in the church thing, but in the mafia and everything else, somebody gives it to you to knock out a competitor. And that's basically what that amounted at, you know.
Now, this pedophile ring, you have evidence that it goes into the highest levels of our country, not only in the church, but to the highest levels, politicians, things like that. Is that the reason why the story never hits the press? I mean, we know they're bought and paid for at all levels.
Yeah.
But would you honestly say from your investigations that this whole idea of the New World Order, the government now being basically a group of traitors along with this infiltration of the church who's helped to do this, how can Americans overlook this? I mean, doesn't it make you kind of lose a lot of sleepless nights knowing the truth, but knowing it's being still covered up to this day?
Oh, definitely. I don't say I lose any sleep over it anymore, because I've been in it this long and have seen different things going on. 20 years ago, 30 years ago, you could never do a show like we're doing right now. It would have never happened. So as I've gone on through the years, every 5 years I could get more out than the 5 years previous. And that's why people like you who have these shows and bring it on are opening this up. You know, you've been around. You could have never done this show 20 years ago.
No. And, and it's still sad to this day that it's only a few people doing it, because it just shows how much control they really have. Because in my mind, and also in my legal mind, I can't get over the amount of evidence that shows beyond a reasonable doubt the connections of the Vatican to the government, their control over foreign policy, their control over our domestic policy, and their involvement in pedophiles and the killing of our children. And yet, it is overlooked as if they don't even exist. It's just incredible to me.
Well, it certainly, and I've been doing these shows for 20 years now, and every time you put out a call, you never ever get anybody to call you and say, what can we do from law enforcement or prosecutors, politicians? Nobody will touch this subject. Let me just give you an example of how this works. During our investigation in '76 with our informant that we got out of the Vatican, I'll give you his name, he was known to us as Dale Smith. We know that's not his real name, and we never found out his real name. But at one point, he gave us a call boy operation, the most high-profile boy operation in the United States. And we went to the Manhattan District Attorney by the name of Robert Morgenthau to get a wiretap on this thing, which would have given us everything we needed. Morgenthau refused to give us the wiretap and then had his squad go in and bust this guy and get all the files, and we never got to see the files because the files would have had all the names and everything else in it. And Morgenthau is still the Manhattan District Attorney to this day. That's why if you look at all this pedophile breaking all over the country, you've never heard anything break in Manhattan.
Okay, so did you hear what he said? I'm back live now in 2015. Did you hear what Rothstein said? Morgenthau, who was the DA of New York, I'm not sure if he's there anymore, that was 2006, blocked the investigation, then used his men to go in and get the files that would have indicted these people so they could be covered up. That's how they use the system. Now, take the first time, and let's just use an example of Tony Alamo, the Christian pastor, who was framed by the IRS. Here's what they did to him. They went in and confiscated his tax records so that he couldn't prove his innocence, and then charged him with violations after they had his books. And they wouldn't, the courts, when this was brought out, the courts wouldn't allow him to get his books back, acting as if the FBI or the IRS agents did nothing wrong. What they basically did was the same thing that they did to Rothstein in a different manner. Use people, get the evidence, and then convict them for their own purposes. Now, if that ain't a kangaroo court, nothing is. And let's go back and see what Jim had to say about Morgenthau and the situation regarding this rampant pedophilia, that they needed to get these wiretaps to basically prove their case. But what happens is the guys at the top levels block it to protect the guilty.
And that's why they've got Egan there now. And between Egan and Morgenthau, there will never be anything breaking in Manhattan about the pedophile stuff that's been going on there prior to this and what's going on now.
Okay, listen, we're going to take a 3-minute break for commercials, 6 minutes for the news. So, Jim, you catch your breath. We're going to have a big hour to come on the Investigative Journal. And we'll be back with Jim Rothstein, a former New York City detective.
Okay, so we took a break there, and I brought Jim back for the second hour, Okay, so now I'm going to bring Jim back for that second hour and continue this subject. And let's start with the old bumper music that played back in 2006 to get us in the mood. You're listening to the Investigative Journal. Let's go.
Okay, we're back on the Investigative Journal, and my guest is Jim Rothstein. He's a former New York City detective, and what a story this is. But let me say, throughout the course of history, all good patriots have been faced with this problem, this onslaught of freedom, the movement of fascism in our country, from the beginning has been attacked by the Vatican, by the minions of the Vatican who are still in governmental power. I'm saying i.e. the Bush family, i.e. the rest of Congress who has sold our country out. We've been faced in the past, our patriots, if you read history, with this problem, and we've somehow staved them off. I don't think we've been victorious. I don't think we've been faced with an onslaught like we're going to be faced with in the next 2 years. But I think Americans will get behind people like Jim Rothstein, many other my guests who come on and tell you point blank, not their opinion, but based on their experiences of what's really happening in this country.
Boy, if you're listening to me back then, how many Americans have gotten behind these guys? Well, there have been some, but boy, was I a bit naive, wasn't I?
And I believe that we will be successful, just as some of our patriots in the past have been, of outing these people and showing the American public what's really happening. And you're a big part of this, Jim. You've spent your life trying to do good, and I don't want people to forget about that. With that, let's not forget what they tried to do to you when you went after the biggest guys in our government and in the church. Tell us how they tried to compromise you throughout the years.
Well, it wasn't that I didn't know what I was doing, and I always knew that I would get a lot of heat over it, and it was part of the job, and it never got in my way. They tried bribing us. There was one occasion where myself and my partner, Matty Rosenthal, were offered 2 suitcases. Each one had $1 million in it. There was promises from the chaplain of the police department that if I compromised Ritter, I'd be promoted to first-grade detective. There were just outright harassment. They tried everything to get you to do what they wanted to do, but because of the special assignment I had been on, I could get away with a lot of things that the average cop couldn't do. But eventually they got to me, and I was retired. But that didn't stop me. I kept right on going, and to this day yet, I do shows like with you, and I prepared. Back in '93, I even put a report together for Congress where they were going to look into this. It never went anywhere, but at least somebody asked. So I have never stopped.
Now, getting back to your last days as a detective, I know they tried to bribe you twice with suitcases full of $1 million bills, adding up to $1 million that you refused.
They were $100 bills.
$100 bills,
Yep.
$1 million in a suitcase.
2 suitcases, one for me and one for my partner.
just to get off the trail of Spellman and the rest of them.
Well, that was after Spellman was dead already. This was to stop the whole thing, just to back off the pedophile stuff.
What about Morgenthau, who's still is still working as a New York City attorney? What is he, the district attorney?
District attorney in Manhattan, yes.
What about Egan, Cardinal Egan now? What's their role? So
well, right now the biggest role those two have is to make sure that none of this stuff comes out. I mean, if you or anybody knows that if there was decadence going on at that time, which we proved above and beyond. In fact, while we were on the break, I looked at it, and my informant at that time, Dale Smith, showed us some what we called John books, which were the books that kept a list of all the people using the little boys. And there were numbers of Franciscan priories on the East Coast, diplomats, military officers, businessmen, and they were all clients. So you can see this covered the scope. And that's why to this day, now, you got Egan there. Not one iota has broken. Every once in a while you'd see a little break, but they'd cover it right back up. And as long as Morgenthau's there and doesn't prosecute, there's nothing you can do.
Now, here's something. I'm going to add this, coming back on 2015, when he's talking about Cardinal Egan. You don't think the presidents of the United States know this? If they did, and were actually going to get to the truth and help you, they would not allow the Cardinal of New York to sit in the middle between the president and the president, the president, sitting president, and also the man running against him. And that's at the Al Smith dinner when they have before an election. You will see the Cardinal sits between the two. And that goes to show you exactly what's going on. Back to Jim Rothstein.
Exactly. So he's in their pocket. Egan works with the Illuminati and the New World Order of New York. How does I never asked you this, but how does Giuliani fit in this?
Giuliani was he at that time was working the drug angle, and Giuliani, there were some people that were associated. If he would have gotten into power and stuff, would have definitely cleaned house. Mm-hmm. Giuliani was a very independent operator. Look what he did when he became the mayor of New York. He did he cleaned up that city, although the pedophile stuff was never really attacked because if you go after that, it's a death knell.
Yeah, and so basically Giuliani cleans the city up but overlooks this. Well, anyway, let's do this. So the last days are interesting because you told me off the air that you finally knew it was time to leave.
Yep.
And tell us what the Catholic chaplain told you, almost like a death threat, I call it.
Yeah,
tell us how that happened.
Well, the chaplain, I got called into his office, and at that time his name was Monsignor Dunn. I'd known him for years, and I get called into the office, and they basically told me that I'd be promoted to first-grade detective if I would back off and forget all this stuff and do that. And the biggest thing is they wanted me to compromise Ritter. And the other angle to this was that if I didn't go along with the program, I would, I knew what the other angle to this was, which would have meant that they would have got me, But I was not. I actually told the Monsignor I was going to take his white collar and do something with it, and I cleaned his desk off. And by that time, they threw me out of his office. And I was. So
basically, he proposed either you take your pension or you may not receive your paycheck ever, and that.
That's what it amounted to. And I knew what he was talking about, and. But they wanted me to compromise Bruce Ritter because you got to remember one thing: Bruce Ritter, at that time, had information that would have taken down the entire upper echelon. Now, are you familiar with the death of Admiral Forrestal?
Yes, I had a man who came on and talked about that, wrote a book about it. Yes, that goes way back to Truman, doesn't it?
Yes, and Forrestal at that time was being compromised by a couple of guys from New York that were using kids to compromise people. And that's how they had the screws put to them, and he found the only way out was to commit suicide. These people were, on top of everything else, there was a tremendous amount of extortion going on in those days. There were cops and stuff making a lot of money off of this, because if you caught a guy and you had him with a pedophile, as a pedophile, there was no limit to the amount of money that was there. And that was one of them. We, at that time, during our investigation, and since then, I can't name them, but there were congressmen, senators, and stuff that we had. And we knew who they were. So this is power. And they used it. There were people that actively used it. I had a young man who traveled the United States for the whole time I was in the police department. In fact, I had run into him the first time in 1965, right after I got off out of the police academy, and I had him in an apartment on West 45th Street with a bunch of little boys. And I called the detectives, and they came in and chased the kids out, and I don't know what else they did. But his name, and for years he traveled the United States. The last time we caught him, he was in a Winnebago. He had just come back from a trip around the United States buying, selling, and kidnapping kids. That's how overt they were. And every time I put this guy in jail, somebody let him out. and
just
it's
amazing.
disgusting.
Yeah, and I mean, is it still going on today from what you learned?
Yes, it's going on as big today and bigger, because now what's really funny is you see all this enforcement on internet where they catch these guys on the internet, and you've seen it on television where they have these guys come to the houses and stuff like that, or these stings. Mm-hmm. Well, the big guy isn't going to do that, because the big guy gets his kids supplied. They make sure that there's no direct connection to them. So they're safer now than ever.
All right, listen.
Okay, so back then I took a break, and we'll come back with more of Jim Rothstein. And we're going to take a break today in 2015. There's about 2 minutes left, and then I'll come back with more. But doesn't you get the point here, why I'm doing this? To really show you that when Jim was trying to get to the truth, I mean, he was a detective. He couldn't do it. He was shut down. He came out with information that shows how they operate, shows who these real criminals are, and they're the ones sitting right there at the Al Smith dinner. Presidents know about it, both parties know about it, and they allow this cardinal from New York, every cardinal from New York, to take center stage because they work together. Now, when you have Morgenthau, New York, as an example, the district attorney covering for them, taking evidence, doing what they want, convicting who they want. And usually it's the ones who are trying to get to the truth. Like Jim Rothstein. He was given an ultimatum. He didn't want the money. So they said, listen, either you stop this or we're going to kill you. And he was a detective. Look what they did to Tony Alamo. Either you stop this or you're going to jail for life. And we're going to disband your ministry. You can't do this here because, folks, there is no freedom of speech. There is no justice in our court system at these levels. There's where the cancer lies. And if you don't root it out, it's never going to change. And back then I was thinking maybe you can. But what happens is the best thing you can do is understand it, know about it, tell people. And, whether we wake up tomorrow and it's gone, I doubt it. Because it seems to always get worse. Back in 3 minutes on the Investigative Journal.
You're listening to FirstAmendmentRadio.com worldwide. Freedom is never free. We need your support today at FirstAmendmentRadio.com.
The program you are listening to is 100% sponsored by you, the listener, on this First Amendment Rights Media channel. You will notice that there are few commercials on this radio network. There's a good reason for that. Corporate advertising dollars come with strings that limit program content. So without your help, these programs cannot continue on internet or our several affiliates. If you benefit by the educational law programs, we ask you to give. If you are admonished or nurtured by the Bible and ministry programs, we ask you to give. If some voice a cause that you are passionate about, we ask you to give. If you believe in any of these, we ask you to support them as you would a missionary on a continual basis, as if giving a tithe for missionary radio. These programs are not commercially viable and must be supported by those faithful to the cause of truth. Look for the button to sponsor your favorite programs at our listen and schedule pages on the internet. Then, when you subscribe, we will send you the last quarterly MP3 CD of that program immediately, and continue to do so with each new quarter. We will also give you unlimited archive access to all of our programs. We're asking you to give much less than a tithe, so that you may also send support directly to a particular program host, cause, and anywhere else the Spirit may lead you. Do all to the glory of our God and Creator, for His holy nation, the only kingdom that will last forever. Thank you for listening. Since the beginning of time, kings have sought it, nations have fought for it. It has been traded, it has been borrowed, it has been purchased, it has been stolen. There's a reason for it. To secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and to our posterity, invest with the security of gold and silver. Call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188 or visit discountgoldandsilvertrading.net. Listen to Financial Survival with your host, Melody Cedarstrom, right here on FirstAmendmentRadio.com at 4 p.m. Eastern or 1 p.m. Pacific Time. Visit discountgoldandsilvertrading.net or call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188. Toll free, 1-800-375-4188.
Okay, we're back for the last half hour of this week's programming. It's a Friday. We got another half hour to go. And I hope you're enjoying looking back to what Jim Rothstein had to say. I will get him on, see what he's up to now in 2015. I touched base with him about a year and a half ago. And he's living in a small town in the Midwest. I think he was the mayor of this small town. Very interesting. And I'll get back to Jim. He still works on cases of people like Johnny Gosch and other kids who've been kidnapped. If you look into the Johnny Gosch story, that's Gosch, you will see really how the inside operations of pedophilia works and what really happens to these kids. Okay, Moose, she's dreaming. Moose, are you okay? My dog dreams and talks. But anyway, we'll get to, I've had Noreen Gosch, Johnny Gosch's mother, on the show, and spent hours with Jim discussing this, but that's for another show. And we'll get back, see how that is progressing, and many more things. But, when I look back at this, I wonder sometimes, really, the more I know, I've talked to people who've listened to this show, who contact me even today and say, I started listening to you and I first started figuring out the Jesuits from your programs. So I know it has an effect. But the point I'm trying to make is it's imperative that you pass this stuff around, that you give it an earshot and then you listen to it, understand it, and pass it on to somebody else. Because once you get it, once you kind of understand the inner workings, really do, it opens up a whole new avenue for you. And I won't explain what that is, but it's exciting. And I don't really understand, just as I sit here, I can't understand how people can just go and ignore this their whole life and pass on. To me, I just can't understand that. That's what I mean. You have to really look at this story and research it yourself. take a lead, take somebody like my show, or there's a few others out there, and begin to look at this stuff. That's why I'm bringing Jim back on, so you can hear what he was saying in 2006 and how it relates today. So let's get back to this, one of the half hours I did with Jim, many hours I spent with him on the air. And we'll play a little bit of that old bumper music to get in the mood of what that show was like in 2006.
Oh, walking towards Washington, walk till peace has come.
Okay, we're back on the Investigative Journal. My guest is Jim Rothstein, a former New York detective who's still working to this day at his own time trying to get to the truth. Jim, you've tried to protect the American people, their children, explain what's really happening at the higher levels. What's your thoughts about how quickly since 9/11 this country has changed?
Well, 9/11 showed us that we have a major terrorism problem. And people have taken interest in it. You can pick whatever side you want. But you know what? We haven't had a 9/11 to show the greatest terrorism that we have in our country right now is the use of our children by these pedophiles. That is by far the greatest terrorism we have in this country now. If you look at all the parents, all the people involved with children who are missing or have been molested, it is a catastrophe, but you don't hear about it. Shows like yours do it, but have you ever heard of it on the major media?
No
way.
Of course not. Of course not. And that's a protected area, and these guys are paid to keep their mouths shut. Let's get into what happened after you left, how you stayed active, how you stayed safe. Knowing that you never stopped trying to get at the truth. You've helped many, many parents, and you're still working to this day. So tell us, what kept you going?
Well, the interesting is after I retired, there was basically a period of 5 years I had to keep my mouth shut because of the way my pension was structured. It could have been messed with. So I went into bar and restaurant business like every other retired detective does. But then while I was in this business, some very strange things would happen. For instance, in one case, an FBI agent was sent to me who was to be put on an investigation on a pedophilia. And he came to me, and it was structured through a bunch of people so I wouldn't know his name or anything. And he asked me how far his investigation could go before his career was jeopardized. And I told him, the different levels and what it was at. And the guy left, and I never seen or heard of him again. But it showed that I wasn't out of the picture. And over this period of time, I started getting calls. People would call me that had gotten my name from somewhere, or they were looking for a kid, and they would call, and they would get my name. And it continued even after the 5 years. It really picked up steam then because I could get involved. And but there was nobody else in the country doing this. I was the only guy who had the experience and worked at that level. My partner, who had worked with me on parts of this, Rosenthal, he ended up retiring, and he ended up dying a couple of years later. But
under suspicious circumstances?
No. He was a sickly guy, and he had a heart attack.
Okay.
So he wasn't murdered or anything. But they did compromise him, though. It's a long story, and I just as soon not go into that. But
okay, we'll continue with what we were talking about then.
Yes, and so that's how I got back into it, and it was just one case or after another. And then in 92, 93, Congressman Charlie Rose from Carolina contacted me to put a report together because there was going to be a bipartisan congressional investigation. So I made this report. Went down to Washington a couple of times, and all of a sudden, when the election came, most of the people that were going to be involved never ran for office again. So it was buried again.
Yeah.
And by that time, though, you had the finders come up and a bunch of other things, and I started getting very busy. And I was getting calls all the time, and it has remained that way till this day. And there are many, many cases. Now, one thing we haven't mentioned yet that ties in with all of this is the Son of Sam case.
All right, go ahead.
You familiar with that case?
Yes, go ahead.
Well, the Berkowitz case, or the Son of Sam case, actually started 8 years before he was arrested. We, in our investigations in this pedophile stuff, had come across, and I had an informant that actually took me to the site in Untermeyer Park where the first sacrifices were taking place. And at that time, as a cop, and it was a very confidential thing. I mean, I was given the information on a little piece of paper and told to go work on it, not tell anybody what I was getting, and I reported back, and the boss was a very good man, a very honest guy, and we never realized what it was till years after the Son of Sam case broke that I actually had the first things that were involved with the Son of Sam case. So you can see how that spread, and now the Son of Sam connection goes across the United States on what we know as the Interstate 9094, where you have, by now I think 27 young men have all mysteriously died and disappeared and everything else. So it's alive and well.
Now, how far did that Son of Sam investigation go? How high up did you find?
It was covered up at the arrest of Berkowitz, because before the arrests were made, they were already moving. They knew they had to throw somebody to the wolves. And in 1997, I was brought back out to New York by the Yonkers Police Department, where they reopened the investigation. And when the old chief of detectives, I can't think of his name right now, found out I was there, the word went out, shut this town down, we don't need this case reopened. So,
how high do you think it went up?
Oh, all the way to the top. When I say the top, it went right across the powers of the state and the country.
Satanic worshiping, the whole.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. We actually found the place in Untermeyer Park. I actually was taken there and shown, and years later, I don't know if you ever heard of Maury Terry, I ran into him years later, and from his informants and the information was exactly the same, the location and everything.
Yeah, and how I view these guys, when I can't leave out one name, but when we talk about the top mafia figures, how hard they are to get to, they're guilty as hell. Same with the Black Pope, Kolvenbach, and then you get to people like George H. Bush, and he's protected, well insulated. But what have you learned about him?
Well, that's a interesting question. I don't know. In fact, we just okayed it. We just have gotten a picture which shows George Bush Sr. with what is believed to be Johnny Gosch in the picture.
So you got a picture just recently of George H. Bush with Johnny Gosch.
Yeah, we believe it's Johnny Gosch. We're waiting for Noreen to verify it. But there is a picture that we just received.
No doubt that it's George H.
Oh, there's no doubt about that. It's just that we're trying to identify it. The photo isn't in the best of shape. It was taken on a cell phone camera. We're getting more information on it, and as we get it, we'll let you in on it and let you know what's happening. But
yeah, we got a minute. We got a minute before this break, and then I want to get into the specifics of Noreen Gosch and all the kids that you found missing.
Okay, so at that point I took a break back in 2006. Always taking a break. Boy, do I take a lot of breaks. Constant breaks. Greg, go to work, will you? No. But anyway, what he's talking about is the investigation he was asked to participate in. Noreen Gosch lost her son. Her son was basically kidnapped, put into this pedophilia ring, and Jim was trying to trace exactly what happened to him, how it occurred, who covered it up. And it led to the highest people in the country as usual, connections to the Vatican as well. And what he did say there that was quite interesting was that when I mentioned 9/11, he was quick to say the biggest terrorism we have in this country is what's going on to our families and our children. And that is quite a statement, and taken from a guy who understands how bad this problem is and how it is covered up at the highest levels. So we'll be back. I'm going to get Jim back. Give me a second here, and I'll get him right back. Okay, let's get back to that final segment with Jim Rothstein.
Short time for you and me. So fine, so good. We're on the road like we knew we would.
Okay, we're back on the Investigative Journal, our last half hour with Jim Rothstein. And Jim, I know you still have to be careful to this day because this is very sensitive stuff. You're still working on this. But let's get back to all these kids. You were talking over 800 you found out have been kidnapped just between those years in the 80s when Johnny Gosch was kidnapped from Des Moines, Iowa. Tell us about how you got involved in this case.
Well, what had happened was after, during the whole time I had worked in the police department, then when I retired, I kept following this particular connection to the upper echelon. And I had heard about Johnny Gosch, Jacob Wetterling, and a couple of these cases that happened. There's others around the country. And then about 10 years ago, I had an occasion to talk to Noreen Gosch more about her son's kidnapping. And that we kept talking, and finally a couple of years ago, I picked up vibes that there were some pictures out there. So for 2 years, we were working on getting pictures. Now, this ties also into the Franklin cover-up, the Omaha, Nebraska Boys Town pedophile operation, which was Henry Vinson and, Larry King, the banker, and all that stuff. And I made a number of trips trying to get pictures, and like always, you end up with a dead-end trail or something, but all of a sudden, Noreen, myself, and a couple other people were sent the photos that showed Johnny Gosch with two other boys hog-tied on a bed, another picture of Johnny by himself, and then a picture of the guy that we believe, and from the information we have, is one of the perpetrators. And we had sent these photos to the missing and exploited children, and they informed us that the picture looked like the guy was dead and, in fact, had a ligature around his neck. So this was pretty hot information, and as you know, everybody jumped on the bandwagon, but the first thing they all tried to do was destroy Noreen. See, Noreen is probably one of the most powerful people in this because she has never, ever bowed to the hogwash that they try to say that they're doing a great investigation and this and that, when I know for a fact nobody has ever looked for Johnny Gosch. The only thing they've ever done is look to cover it up. And so they went after Noreen on these pictures, and then we started getting some more, and we were able, through radio shows like yours and others, get people to cooperate, and we actually found where these pictures were coming from. So it was the first big break we had in the case, and at the same time, the pictures showed up. When the first pictures that Noreen got showed up, I was also alerted that the pictures had showed up in Omaha, Nebraska, of a bunch of other children who had been used, and it actually had photos showing these kids being used. And I was supposed to come and get them, but I realized that if I went after these photos and it showed the actual acts, it would have been child porn, and I would have been locked up on the spot.
As you can see, it's a touchy area, but Jim never stopped. But to talk openly today about it, the problem's gotten worse, and there have been so many of these missing children and kidnappings going into these pedophile rings that I still talk with Jim Rothstein, and I wanted to say, send this show out if you get this show wherever you're at, and if you do have a problem, if you have a missing child. It's easy to contact me through First Amendment Radio. I'll listen to your story, and maybe together with Jim Rothstein, we can help and research the subject and the person for you. So we're not going to forget about it, because this is what happens. If we get this information, it leads to more information. And this is the only way that we can, in a way, stop this. So let's get back to Jim Rothstein.
So those pictures were in Omaha for 48 hours, and then they went underground again. So there
Okay,
are
so
more
you thought they were going to set you up at that point, huh?
Yes, because you don't do anything here that somebody don't know what you're doing. They've been watching me for years, and they use me. They give me information, and they also, I'm sure there's some people out there who would like to see me compromised, But the pictures are still coming in. Like that picture we just got, once we clean it up, and we're working on getting an original copy of that picture. So it's not ready yet. But if it does, it'll go to the proper authorities, and they're going to come out and hammer us with everything they got.
Yeah, so you're getting no cooperation with the FBI. Noreen's been on my show recently. No cooperation with the mainstream media. No cooperation, basically trying to smear her.
Yes.
Tell us about her character, and I know you believe exactly what Noreen says, don't you?
Yes, and Noreen, another thing is Noreen does not go for disinformation. She'll make sure, or as best as we can, to make sure that the information we're getting is factual. There are ways to check this stuff out, and we've been able to do it in many cases. But the people who are trying to discredit her are the mainstream media, and in fact, the newspaper down there in Des Moines, Iowa, really slammed her. They're even going so far as to say that her son, Johnny Gosh, never came home. And, well, how come he never went to the police? Well, these people don't understand. Once you're in this subculture for 72 hours, you do not come out of it. And I can verify that on many cases that I worked on.
What do they do to these kids? We didn't get into what they do, but within 72 hours, they're already brainwashed and compromised, correct?
Yes, and I personally have witnessed that. I have personally taken kids in the case of Ben Rose, probably a notorious pedophile who was tied to the highest operations in this country. He had a pharmacy on 2nd Avenue in Midtown Manhattan, and he ended up being my informant, and yes, we were able to tie this stuff together. And if they
exactly what do they do to these kids? I mean,
the first thing is most of these kids are picked ahead of time. And I like to use it as like if you watch the Nature Channel where they show a pack of wolves going after a herd of deer, they know which one to take. And I've actually watched this happen in our investigations. And if they get the kids, like in the Ben Rose case, we caught him with 3 boys who he had kidnapped out of Maryland. And we watched that, and that's how we finally made the arrest. And we saved these 3 kids, and we're able to get them back to their parents. But these kids would never, ever have gone back to their parents if we hadn't have been right on the trail of it. So that's how that works. They use it. Then what they'll do is photograph them, and they'll usually tell them, your parents sold us to you, and, and they work on them. That's how it works, and they'll never go back. I had a case of a young man, he was in his 30s, committed suicide when he was jilted by his lover, and we found out that he had been kidnapped out of Texas at the age of 13. Never went home.
My God. And now I can understand why you are trying to get to the bottom of this, because if you get no cooperation from the authorities, and if the authorities and the high-level powers in the church are involved in this, then, we have a serious problem. We need to save our kids. I mean, what do you do in this case, Jim?
Well, the big thing is the public, an outcry from the public is the thing that we need. We need the public demanding that something be done. And there's stuff that can be done. You see all these laws they're passing. Oh, we're fighting the pedophilia. We're doing this. None of these laws have any meat to them. For instance, any police officer that works on this, prosecutor, anybody, his job is in jeopardy. So the first thing we'd have to do is say that any enforcement agent, number one, who doesn't do his job, or prosecutor, or any authority that's working on this, should be charged with a crime. Then we should have another law that says that if you interfere, threaten, harass, or impede any investigation or anything like that, that it's a felony and mandatory 5 years in prison. You think by that time you'd get some action? because the cops, there's thousands of cops out there that would do this. FBI agents, I mean, I've had FBI agents literally just sitting there say, you know, they would do it if they could. But
yeah, and so they're getting blocked at the high levels, correct?
That's right. That's like every investigation. I can name 100 investigations that have gone, and they only go to a certain level, and they're stopped.
And what about...
Okay, so I got a minute left. You know, I'm going to bring a couple of these. We left off on how these pedophilia rings operate. And through the Johnny Gosch story, which I went through with Jim in depth, you'll see. Maybe I'll bring that back next week, because it's important you know exactly what they do, how they operate, and how after the first 24 hours, if there's a police stand-down, and what they'll typically do is say, no, the kid ran away. Even in the Johnny Gosch case, even when someone saw him apprehended, the police at the local level who were in on it said, no, he must have just ran away. And once they're gone, 24, 48 hours, it gets cold. The trail gets cold quick, and like Jim said, you may never see the child again. Okay, so we'll be back next week, Monday, on the Investigative Journal. Have a good weekend, and I'll see you then.
Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. That's crosstheborder.org.
I know you all want answers, and believe me, so do I, and I'll do my best to get them.
Despite Nicolas Cage's promise to do his best to get left behind rapture answers for us, don't hold your breath. Not everyone believes Left Behind is true prophecy. Some may even regard as conspiratorial the mainstream re-release of the Left Behind movie, with actor Nicolas Cage portraying the main character, as an attempt to further reinforce in the minds of all this perception of false prophecy, in order to condition the masses for the play about to begin. If you want true Bible prophecy answers, get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. The author exposes the Latin rapture origin, the 7-year tribulation deception, true Bible revelation of Daniel's 70 weeks, the abomination of desolation, the restrainer, America in the Revelation, the image of the beast and the mark of the beast, and the truth about God's chosen people, and so much more about Bible prophecy. This book will shatter the Left Behind paradigm of future events. Get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. That's crosstheborder.org.